And welcome back. We are now going to look at how to throw exceptions. Of course, this is a way for us to handle this before we have to worry about the program itself kicking them. And let's take a deeper look at that. So when we talk about throwing an exception, last time we did this, we looked at this, for example, when we said, hey, we're going to use next int, and we put in a non-integer. So, for example, we typed a letter, and we handled that exception accordingly. Now, we did not write the method that threw the exception. We are only responsible for catching and handling any exceptions. And for many programs, this pattern is all that we need. All right, we just write whatever exception we need, and we'll handle the code accordingly. However, it's also possible to code your own throwing of the exception. And to do this, we use a throw statement inside of the try block in the format throw, new exception, and then just some string that's going to describe what that exception is. So the throw statement is one chunk of code that is going to be very powerful here, because when it's executed, the executing of the surrounding try block is stopped. Much as like when we saw it before, it's like, oh, we had an exception. We stop whatever we're doing our try block, and then we go to the catch block. So it's not anything that we haven't seen before. It's like now we have a line of code that will trigger that for us. And the code in the catch block is then, of course, executed. And the way we do that, just as an example, we say like throw new exception, and we say division by 0. This is just an example of looking at how do we actually write that code. And of course, it's in the same format. We have the throw word, we have new exception, and then some string in here that's just identifying what we are doing. Now the get message method is part of the exception class here. So every exception has a string instance variable that contains some message, which typically is going to identify the reason for our exception. For example, if we say the exception is thrown as follows, throw a new exception string argument, then the string is given as an argument to the constructor exception, and it's used as the value of the string instance variable. Now, if we said it's like the object is e, because we've seen this quite often, exception e, then the method would be e.getMessage, we would return whatever that string is. We gave it a different name. Instead of e, it would just be whatever that string is. So let's say it was input or line or whatever, just whatever that name of it is, .getMessage, and that's just what's going to return for us. Now let's look at this with an example throw. Suppose the following throw statement is executed in a try block. Throw new exception, input must be positive. And suppose the following is a catch block immediately following. Catch exception e, system.println e.getMessage, system.println program aborted, system.exit 0. In this case, the method call e.getMessage will return the string input must be positive. If we look at that e.getMessage, of course, that is coming right here from this throw call where it said exception input must be positive. So this get message again is going to be whatever was put here in this throw line. Now, if we take a little deeper understanding of what throwing is and how it works, so we have to first know two things. First, what is the exception class? All right, how does it work? And what does the throw operator do once we create an exception object? Well, the class exception is just another class that's in the standard Java package java.lang, so we don't have to worry about importing it. It's part of the Java language. And as we've already seen, the class exception has a constructor that takes in a single string argument. The exception object creates and stores the string argument in a private instance variable that belongs to the exception class, and the string argument can be retrieved from the exception object as we've seen with the .getMessage. Now, ultimately what this is doing is it's changing our program flow. The throw operator causes a change in the flow of control and delivers the exception object to a suitable place, as we're about to kind of explain here. When the throw operator is executed, the try block ends immediately, as we kind of have expected and experienced already with our exceptions, and the control will pass to the catch block. The execution of the throw operator in a try block is very similar to the execution of a break statement or in a loop or a switch. So very similar to that. Just like when we do a break, we exit out, we're done with it. Same thing's happening here with a throw. Now, when control is transferred to the catch block, the exception object that is thrown is plugged in for that catch block parameter e that we typically have seen. So exception e, it's going to plug that in and it's going to handle it. Now the method getMessage of the class exception is an accessor method that retrieves the string in the private instance variable of the exception object. That is, the string is used as an argument to the exception constructor. So just as I've already mentioned, we're going to go ahead and say whenever we pass that string argument in, it's stored in the private instance variable. We use getMessage to pull that back down in order to actually have that displayed within our program. And if we look at the sample program here real quick, one of the things we can see is that we're using a system.exit here. So this is terminating our program. And while this can work, it's not necessarily, again, the best approach that we want to have with our game. Because here you can see it's like, hey, we want to check to see if we have enough players to play this game. So if we run our program and say enter in 5 and 4, and we say, oh, the game is canceled, there's no players on the second team. Perfect. So that tells us this is great and it exits out. But what if we wanted to have more things after this? All right, right now we just have a simple print line statement, but if we wanted more that we want to add to this program, maybe we don't want the program to terminate at this point. Maybe we can find a way to have a substitution, for example, or we can play a match with a smaller number of players. These are things that we could think about with our program design, but we can't currently implement with this system X0 because once it does the exit, the program is terminated. So what we want to do instead is replace this exit here with a throw statement that's going to go ahead and handle an exception that says like, hey, there's not enough players, because then we could, of course, have things move in a different direction. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my whole kind of if-else chunk here, and I'm just going to make a try block here, and let's go ahead and just move this into the try block. And of course, it's going to complain because we don't have a catch block right now, so let's just go ahead and do a catch here, and we're just going to do an exception E. We're not worried about a specific one right now because we're simply just getting a message here. And what we want to do is inside of this exception class, we then want it to be able to handle things. Now, right now this won't be caught by anything, but we'll take care of that here in just a second because we're going to replace this system.exit 0 with our throw. So we're going to just change this to throw new exception. And then we can, of course, put inside this exception, what do we want it to actually throw? So let's go ahead and just move our print line statement here. This is now going to become our string. So I'm going to go ahead and move that into the exception line. And I can remove this print line out of here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing here for my other exception throws. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace this with a throw new exception. Paste that in. And repeat the process here for the last one. So again, take our string and replace this with a throw new exception. All right. Now we can go to our catch statement. Well, the first thing we want to do with our catch statement, well, what do we want to do? Well, we have this exception here, so we probably will want to have this message be returned. So let's go ahead and just create a string. We're going to call this message, and we're going to equal that to e.getMessage. And you can see it pops right up here. Boom, there it is. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to print that out. So system.println, and I can just have it print out message. Now, I could, of course, at this point still have it, just for this purpose, we're just going to go ahead and put up back in our system.exit 0. Just so that it exits right now. Now, again, this doesn't have to be here. We could, of course, have this just proceed onward and have it move to a different line of code. We could have a different scenario set up, but for our purposes right now, we're just going to go ahead and leave this as is. Even though this doesn't change anything ultimately with what this program was doing, it does make it a little bit nicer because then this exit knows instead of having all these exits that we had here, we only have one actual invocation of exit. And so if we run this, I'm going to do the same inputs. I'm going to do 5 and 4. You notice we still get the same output that we would be expecting. However, the biggest difference here is that this is now being handled with exception throws instead of having to code that in specifically with all the other code that we had before.